My name is Anna Mercer, and I'm a responsible investment analyst at Square Mile Research. For the next 40 minutes, we will be focusing on the topic of how businesses are evolving to become more responsible, considering issues like what that actually means, how we can identify them, and the role of engagement.
If I look at the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which is mainly insurance businesses, we've seen that move from an opening group of 33 signatories at the end of 2019. That's now included 61 signatories with over 10 trillion in assets. And even more amazingly, the Net Zero Banking Alliance has seen an increase from the initial signatories that we had back in April 21. This is very recent. So only sort of 6 months down the line, we started with 43. That's now increased to 95 banks.
If 5 years ago you said to us, we'll have 80% of GDP and 50% of assets under management having net zero plans, you'd have probably bitten their hand off for that outcome. Unfortunately, when you filter those numbers for countries which have actual plans, that number falls to around 10%. And so for me, the big takeaway was that there is still this kind of huge gap to close, and that is going to require a sort of an unusual effort from business as well as governments, and that is going to be a joint effort. And I think that was really emphasized through the government rhetoric came out, which was much more around business taking responsibility for climate change as well as governments.
When we come to, again, the lack of a meaningful transition for the fossil fuel industry, and hence the slight disconnect that we might have between all the very strong commitments from the financial community, from asset managers and from banks. But if we look at the necessary transition for the who currently have 80% of the global 80% share of the global energy mix, then we should not forget that the majority of global oil and gas and coal is produced by state-owned companies and state-controlled companies. And as such, obviously, the impact that the financial services industry can have on these countries and companies, I think realistically is limited. And hence the failure to get these countries to the table and to really articulate a clear transition plan for the industry is a clear missing element of COP, and obviously brings me back to the measurement of the carbon price, because that clearly would incentivize people to put in place the necessary changes.
The UK is a great example. Less than 10% of assets are aligned to responsible investing products. And yet when you do surveys, 70, 80, 90% of people are indicated are interested in sustainable investing. And I think we always used to say, put your money where your mouth is, but I think we're moving to a world where you need to put money where your heart is. And at the moment, that isn't being done. And I think one of the biggest issues that the industry faces is the communication of these very complex and sophisticated issues, which are multifaceted, and they're not necessarily black or white. But one of the problems is that the industry uses interchangeable language. Sustainable, ethical, responsible, impact, SRI. Different firms mean different things to it. And I think what we've seen, and I think is an amazingly positive step forward from the FCA with Managed Treasury, is on the SDR approach, the Sustainable and Disclosure Regulation, with the view of creating some labels. Now, I'm not a massive fan of labels per se, but I do think setting the spectrum of responsible investment products is really crucial.
We try to focus on this word material issues. So what's important, and those material issues can come from the company's supply chain or its own operations or the product impact, so that whole value chain approach. And to sort of bring some examples to life here, you might have a mining company who might be producing copper or nickel, key commodities for the energy transition, but they might have some terrible operational practices around pollution or local community impacts or safety. And these are real world examples that we see, and have chosen to not invest in those specific companies, but instead get access to that commodity through other companies who do have good operational practices as well as good commodity exposures for the energy transition. And so we look at both. We look at the whole value chain and try to make a judgment, an evidence-based judgment on that.
Very important to understand as well is a company that still needs to change or probably hasn't addressed all the externalities that we found yet can still be a responsible company. We should not forget that the transition is still yet to be completed for a large number of sectors. To illustrate this, let's think about the oil and gas industry. And we know as of today, it is only around 25% of the listed oil and gas sector that is aligned to a net zero outcome by 2050. So does that mean that the remaining 75% are not sustainable? And I think that there we have to be very careful that we are not coming to a premature judgment, because obviously our responsibility as an asset manager, of course, is to engage to make sure that companies can articulate a path towards a sustainable future, and that we as the investors obviously are here to help with that and to stay invested through their journey.
Not everyone today is perfect. No one is really aligning to net zero today. We need to get there. It's a journey. It's the escalator we have to get on. And I don't think companies should be punished, this is a personal view, for not necessarily being on it today. I think what we need to do is say, if you're not on it and in a certain period of time, if you're not willing to make commitments, well, then you are going to be on the naughty step. And that naughty step is not going to be on the escalator, it's going to be somewhere else, and you're not going to be included, and we're going to have to divest. But it's not today. And this is a very different approach to a number of SRI and impact approaches, which has been to say we'll never invest in oil or gas or certain sectors because they're high emitters. My view is, to solve this problem, you have to approach all emissions and approach it. And I think the great thing for me is that net zero and the development of net zero is a transitionary approach, inclusion on all industries to do better, rather than to just say we won't include you, because I think that's a key component.
We will have next year for the first time the Say on Climate, where it requires a far more detailed understanding of the climate plans that companies will put forward, and hence really requires the knowledge and expertise on our side to critically judge these plans, and obviously then transparently vote against or in favor. Because again, to me, engagement is all about transparency with the companies we invest in and obviously with our clients as well. Nothing should happen behind closed doors. And this is why the way we have to obviously look at companies really has evolved in a way that I find incredibly exciting. And I think hopefully for our clients to see the benefit of this, not only obviously within their products, but within the societal impact that we can achieve as well.
Clearly, engagement is an important part of the system to ensure that feedback loop between investors and management. And so kind of as an example, there's quite a few utility companies who have a thermal coal starting point, and we engaged with one of these thermal coal utility companies to highlight that incoming carbon taxes, decreasing economics of coal, and doing forward-looking projections on that utility profile that they had, the decommissioning profile wasn't fast enough. And through those conversations and challenging management, they could bring forward that decommissioning of coal to 2040 to 2025 and ramp up the spending in renewables. And we don't take credit for that as if it was just us. There was a combination of the regulators, other investors as well pushing it. It's a system change thing. But it's that kind of engagement and challenging and providing feedback to management that creates that change.